There are passages in Scripture that comfort, there are passages that instruct, and then there are passages that feel almost hidden, not hidden because they are obscure, hidden because they are dangerous. Just before the flood narrative begins in the book of Genesis, a word appears that unsettles everything we think we understand about early humanity. Nephilim, 4 verses before the waters rise, 4 verses before the world is judged. No explanation, no genealogy, no origin story, just a statement. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and then the text continues, as though you already know who they are, but we don't. And tonight, we slow down. Hebrew is not casual. Every word grows from a root, and the root of Nephilim is naphal, to fall. So Nephilim literally means the fallen ones, but Hebrew roots are layered. Naphal can mean to fall violently, to collapse, to descend from a higher place, to cause others to fall. Already, interpretation branches are they, fallen angels, fallen warriors, tyrants who make others fall, or beings who fell from heaven. Now here is where history intervenes. When Jewish scholars translated Genesis into Greek in the Septuagint, they rendered Nephilim as gigantes, giants, not metaphorical, not poetic, physical, large, terrifying. Why would translators make that leap? Because the tradition they inherited understood Nephilim as more than human, and that tradition was ancient. Genesis 6 does not begin with giants. It begins with a phrase, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men," the Hebrew, Bene. Now here is where precision matters. This exact phrase appears elsewhere in Scripture. In the opening chapter of the Book of Job, we read, "The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord." There, the context is unmistakable. These are divine beings, members of the heavenly court. The same phrase, the same grammar, the same construction. If language is consistent, Genesis 6 is not describing the line of Seth marrying the line of Cain. It is describing heavenly beings crossing a boundary, and that boundary produces offspring. Genesis says, "They took wives of all whom they chose." The verb is lakach. This is covenantal language, marriage language. Then comes the phrase, "They bore children to them." This is standard reproductive terminology. No symbolism, no poetic imagery, no allegory signals. Genesis reads like genealogy, because Genesis is obsessed with genealogy. With seed, the Hebrew word zara, seed, threads through the entire book, from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, from Abraham to Israel. Genesis tracks bloodline carefully, and then suddenly, in chapter 6, something enters that line, something outside the human category. A few verses later, the text declares, "All flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth." The Hebrew word for flesh, basar, not morality, flesh, biological life. And the text repeats it, "All flesh had become corrupted." This is not merely ethical decay. It reads like ontological distortion. And immediately after that statement, God announces the flood. If Genesis 6 is only about moral evil, the flood feels catastrophic. But if Genesis 6 is about corruption of creation itself, of flesh, then the flood becomes preservation, a cleansing, a reset. And then the text says something that most readers skim past. Of Noah, it says, "Noah was perfect in his generations." The Hebrew word is tamim, blameless, whole, unblemished. It is the same word used for sacrificial animals without defect. Perfect in his generations, generations, plural, lineage. Suddenly, the verse trembles with implication. Genesis 3:15 contains a prophecy. The seed of the woman shall bruise the serpent's head. Seed versus seed, line versus line. If you corrupt the human seed, you obstruct the promise. Genesis 6 now looks less like random chaos, and more like interference, a strategy. Because if a redeemer must come through human lineage, that lineage must remain human. Ancient Jewish tradition did not leave Genesis 6 unexplored. The Book of Enoch expands the narrative dramatically. It names the angels. 200 watchers descend. They swear an oath on Mount Hermon. They take wives. They produce giants, and those giants consume the earth. Now, whether one considers Enoch canonical or not, it demonstrates how early Jewish readers understood Genesis 6, literally, not metaphorically. The New Testament even references Enoch. In the Epistle of Jude, Jude cites a prophecy attributed to Enoch. This tells us something crucial. Second Temple Judaism did not interpret Genesis 6 symbolically. It interpreted it cosmologically. If the flood eliminated the Nephilim, why do they reappear? In the book of Numbers 13-33, the spies say, We saw the Nephilim there. They connect them to the sons of Enoch, the Anakim, the Rephaim, Og, of Bashan. The text records the size of his bed, 9 cubits long. Ancient Israel remembered something large, something terrifying. Was the genetic line eradicated, or did it resurface? The most uncomfortable question is if Nephilim were literal hybrids. What does that imply? It implies angels can interact materially. Boundaries between realms were violated. The flood was defensive, and human history is more complex than modern theology prefers. But the text does not flinch. Genesis presents it plainly. No embellishment, no mythic flourish. Just, they were there. The mystery beneath the waters, the flood, covered the earth. But it did not erase the text, and Genesis 6 remains. 4 verses, 1 word, a fracture in the narrative of humanity, a biological anomaly before judgment, a warning embedded in Scripture, and perhaps a clue, because later, in the book of Daniel 2:43, we read, "They shall mingle themselves with the seed of men." Mingle, seed. Again, the language returns, as if history echoes, and so we are left not with certainty, but with tension where the Nephilim myth, metaphor, memory, or genetic rebellion. The Hebrew does not simplify the question, it deepens it, and that may be precisely the point.